This is one we don't have in Michigan yet. Does anybody know this fish? It's a giant snakehead. I think I have the name yet, or northern snakehead, giant snakehead. It's an aquarium fish, or a popular aquarium fish. So people get them when they're small, and they're kind of like some of the cichlids you buy. They'll eat other live minnows and stuff, so people like to have them in their aquariums. But they get so big and so voracious that sometimes people will then release them. And these guys have some really cool adaptations to survive in drought conditions. They can kind of bury themselves in almost dry mud for several months at a time and still be able to breathe and sustain drought periods in their native habitat. They also have adapted the pectoral fins, the two little ones on the front, to actually move a little bit to crawl between wet puddles. Not found in Michigan yet, but there's a couple of native lookalikes, so we get a lot of calls of people saying, I think I found snakehead. It's usually a burbot or a bowfin, which are native to Michigan. But they look similar to this fish. There's some key differences. Anyway, this is one we don't want in Michigan. It's prohibited in Michigan. You cannot have these in your aquarium. They're not legal for sale or possession in Michigan. We have a couple invasive crayfish in Michigan. We have lots of native crayfish too, but we have a couple invasives that are some bad actors. On the left is the rusty crayfish, which is very common in Michigan. It's one of the two most common crayfish. The other's a native. But if you catch a crayfish in Michigan and you don't know anything about IDing crayfish, they're sometimes tough to ID. It's probably a rusty or one of 9 native species that's very common as well. But rusties are all over in Michigan now. They have this rusty colored spot right here on the carapace, which is kind of a key identifying characteristic. And then on the right, we have the red swamp crayfish, which is the common crayfish, that you'll find like down in Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast where they have crayfish boils. This is the one that is usually eaten, so it's a really popular food item, but it is a super aggressive crayfish. Both these crayfish have really large, much larger claws than our natives, more aggressive than our natives. They burrow much more aggressively than our native crayfish do, so they tear up the banks along the sides of rivers and lakes where they live. Red swamp crayfish you may have seen in the news over the summer. It was first detected in southeast Michigan this year, 2017. We didn't think we had these in Michigan. Now we found them in multiple lakes this summer. Once word got out with this one news article, then people started going, I think we have those in our pond. I've seen those in our grass. So now I've kind of lost track. Our fisheries guys could tell you, but there's, I think, over 10 locations now in Michigan that have been found this summer that have invasive red swamp crayfish. Do you have a question?
Are either of those illegal to possess?
Yep. Red swamp crayfish are prohibited in Michigan, so you cannot possess a red swamp crayfish. So we think they were probably brought here as bait, fishing bait. A lot of times fishermen will use crayfish for bait, and they do make good bass bait. So people would buy these, they make it off the hook, or they dump their bait at the end of the day. It is now illegal to possess these in Michigan, but they're tough to ID. So it's, lack of knowledge isn't necessarily an excuse, right? Same thing, I don't know the speed limit, officer. I don't know what kind of crayfish it is, Mr. Conservation Officer, but they are illegal to possess, and they're illegal to sell, illegal to import into Michigan. Phragmites, I touched on this one a little bit before, but you've probably seen Phragmites around Michigan. If you've driven along I-75, there's lots of it. Used to be a ton of it in the UP, but the same project that funds this project has been funding some UP Phragmites control and management. Now there are no more large stands of Phragmites in Michigan. There's some individual, very small patches, but it's been being treated very aggressively over the last 3 years. Invasive Phragmites. There is a native Phragmites. Really, I've never seen it, but it does exist in Michigan. And I bring this one up because I can, again, go back to the human health impact here, because Phragmites often grows along roadsides because when you mow it, fragments can then reroot and spread. So a lot of times our road commissions and State of Michigan, Department of Transportation, we're working with them, but they will mow this stuff and spread it down the side of the road on their mowers and on their trucks, and it ends up in places near intersections and gets really tall, 10 to 15 feet tall, and really thick and really bushy with these plumes, can actually block your vision at intersections. So you may miss a stop sign, a stoplight, a car turning in front of you. At the end of the season, it dries out and becomes super dry and super flammable, so it's actually a fire hazard too. A couple of years ago, I think 5 years ago now, there was a large Phragmites fire near the Palace of Auburn Hills in southeast Michigan. That was a huge field of Phragmites caught on fire. And so it's a fire hazard. It can be a road hazard. This is just a cool picture from Ottawa County, Grand Haven, along the Grand River. And you can see how Phragmites can start to fill in a wetland. Right, this was at one point a nice fishing pier that you could go out and have access to the Grand River to fish or look at birds or do what you do on a fishing pier, and Phragmites gets in there and can quickly start filling in a wetland, and you can see a direct impact there to the resource, our access to the resource, which is probably the biggest issue with invasive Phragmites, is it blocks view sheds, and if you are a lakefront property owner or you use public property to access lakes, if there's Phragmites there, that can all change really quickly. So this has since been treated, and there's no Phragmites in this location anymore, which is awesome. But this is a kind of a cool picture of what can happen. Here's a species that is, I'm going to call it invasive in Michigan. Some people, particularly people in the nursery and landscape industry, sometimes don't like it when we call this one invasive because they don't think it can overwinter, but we have some anecdotal evidence that maybe says otherwise. The book is still out on that one, but does anybody recognize this? Right, this is water hyacinth. So it's a floating aquatic plant, definitely not native to Michigan, definitely can have huge impacts elsewhere, and we found it in lots of locations in the wild in Michigan where we think people have taken it from their water garden and dumped it. So it is legal to possess, it is legal to purchase. You can buy these at landscape and nursery stores, which isn't necessarily a problem if you're keeping it contained in your backyard pond. But at the end of the season, when you want to start over next year with a new pond or new landscaping, don't dump this stuff. I think I might have a picture. Yeah, so this is a picture from out east, and this is all water hyacinth. This is not a picture from Michigan, but you can see it can form this huge monoculture and totally change the ecosystem. It blocks all the light, changes the chemistry of the water, and obviously there's not much good fishing or boating going on right there. Water hyacinth. Another one we have in Michigan in isolated occurrences, not quite as isolated as it used to be. We found this in Michigan 2016, summer of 2016, for the first time in West Michigan. So we found this in, if you're familiar, if you're from around here, Reeds and Fisk Lake, and the channel between Reeds and Fisk Lake. DNR and DEQ and our partner, I think Drew is going to be here later today from West Michigan SISMA, has been working really hard to treat that location. So it's the only known location of European frogbit in West Michigan. There's actually a lot of this on the east side of the state, Saginaw Bay area. There's a location up in the northeast part of the state as well. Looks like a little tiny lily pad, but you can see it again just can cover a water body. And ironically, it likes to grow at the base of Phragmites and cattails. Sometimes when you remove Phragmites, if there was any frogbit present, it can make the frogbit take off. So we always talk when we're managing invasives, you've got to have a plan for what you're going to do after you treat the primary invasive, because often what invades next is another invasive. Anybody recognize this? Kudzu, right? Do we have kudzu in Michigan?
Not yet.
We do. We've got 3 potential locations. I know of 3 that have been confirmed kudzu. This is not a picture from Michigan. This is a picture of what kudzu can do. It kind of covers the landscape and turns it into a jungle. But we do have 3 locations of kudzu in Michigan. Let me go back. It does survive the winter. This is kudzu in Allegheny County from 2010 is when this picture was taken. All growing up the side of the dune. So somebody brought this in here to stabilize the dune, and it does a pretty good job of stabilizing the dune. That sand's not going anywhere, but it really changes that dune ecosystem. The Nature Conservancy, TNC, if you're familiar with them, has a project along the Lake Michigan shoreline treating a lot of different invasives, baby's breath, this kudzu site. They came in and hand removed it. So this is all the kudzu rolled down the dune They did this, I think, 2 consecutive years. In that location, I don't think there's any more kudzu there. I know of 2 other sites in Benzie County, kind of Frankfurt area, where there's kudzu. And it, again, looks like somebody put it in to stabilize a dune. Anybody recognize this one? It's kind of a tricky one if you're not familiar with aquatic plants. It's an aquarium plant, or a popular aquarium plant. This is parrot feather. So it's a cousin to Eurasian water milfoil, which you may know. It's a more aggressive form of milfoil. It's in that same family. It grows below the surface really thick, but then it comes up and pops above the surface. This is in southeast Michigan in Brownstown Township. 2012, we found the first known occurrence of parrot feather in this little community pond. It's actually a drain field pond. So not a really prime natural area for hiking or fishing or anything. It's just a drainage area for this housing community. But it was the first known occurrence of parrot feather. So DNR, DEQ, Department of Ag went out and treated this. I don't think I do have the before and after. So the before on top, the picture I just showed, this is what it looked like 2015. So we think we eradicated it from that site. Good news. That was the only known occurrence of parrot feather. Over the last 2 years, we found parrot feather in at least 3 other locations around Michigan. We're working to do the same thing with parrot feather in those locations. Haven't eradicated it in those other 3 spots yet, but hopefully we'll get there. It's a really aggressive plant, and there's one spot we've been treating now for 2 consecutive summers, 3 times each summer, and it still keeps coming back. Parrot feather, I believe, is another Eurasian species, so somewhere over in Europe, Asia. I don't know the exact country of origin. But it's a popular aquarium plant. It is prohibited in Michigan, but people put it in their aquariums. Aquarium stores will often sell it, not legally anymore in Michigan, but at one point. So we think these occurrences are ones where people have dumped their aquarium or gotten rid of their aquarium plants. This one is not found in Michigan yet. It's got a distinctive leaf, another floating leaf aquatic plant. It can do that. This is a bay in Lake Champlain in Vermont. Got 10 minutes here, so I'm gonna keep rolling. It is water chestnut. We don't have it in Michigan yet, but it's one we're watching for. It's on our watch list. If you picked up one of those plastic cards back there, those are species that are either not found in Michigan yet or found in very low abundance or very isolated occurrences. Species we feel like we have a shot at eradicating. Find them. Water chestnut would be one of those. And I throw this in here because we're not just talking about plants and not just talking about mussels and fish. There's a mammal on our watch list too. It's called nutria. It looks like a beaver without the beaver tail, or a muskrat. Has distinctive orange teeth. Kind of see in that photo, and it just wreaks havoc on wetland areas because it kind of ruts around in the muck and goes after plant roots, plant materials. We don't have it in Michigan yet. This is a southern species, Gulf states, but there's concern that it could get here. It has been invasive in other states. So this is one of 2 mammals on Michigan's invasive list. The other is feral swine, which I'm not going to get into.